In the chaos of World War II, Germany needed a miracle in the skies, and they believed they'd found it in the BMW 801. It wasn't just an engine, it was a monster. Loud, complex, and brutally powerful. At its core was the promise of German air supremacy. But behind its mechanical roar lay a story of sabotage, suffering, and near failure. From the hands of brilliant engineers to the secret resistance fighters within BMW's own walls, the 801 became a battlefield of its own. This is the untold story of how the Luftwaffe's most powerful weapon nearly destroyed itself from the inside out. The Luftwaffe's crisis and the birth of a beast. By late 1939, Germany's Messerschmitt Bf 109 was already showing signs of age. British Spitfires and Hurricanes were catching up, and fast. The Luftwaffe's dominance was under threat, and the Reich's top brass knew they needed more than an upgrade. They needed a breakthrough. Enter the Focke-Wulf FW-190, an unorthodox, all-new fighter designed by Kurt Tank. But it wasn't the airframe that made jaws drop. It was the engine. Tank's vision required something radically different from Germany's trusted inline liquid-cooled engines. He needed a rugged, air-cooled radial powerhouse, something that could deliver unmatched speed, climb, and combat durability. The assignment fell to BMW. Their answer? The BMW 801. A twin-row, 14-cylinder radial engine that looked like it belonged in a bomber, not a nimble fighter. Displacing over 41 liters and promising more than 1,600 horsepower, the engine was bold, experimental, and deeply controversial. Germany had little experience with high-performance radial fighters. The decision to abandon the traditional inline designs shocked conservative engineers and military leaders alike. Still, BMW promised the 801 would not only compete with Allied aircraft, but obliterate them. The gamble was on, but in the pursuit of revolutionary power, they were about to unlock revolutionary problems. Engineering ambition inside the BMW 801's core. The BMW 801 was not just a leap in horsepower, it was a leap in philosophy. At its heart, this radial beast packed 1,700 horsepower thanks to 14 massive cylinders arranged in 2 rows. Each cylinder displaced nearly 3 liters. Imagine 14 motorcycle engines working in perfect harmony at 2,700 RPM. It was raw mechanical poetry wrapped in cooling fins and forged aluminum. But its most revolutionary feature wasn't mechanical, it was intellectual. The Kommandogerät, or command device, was a mechanical computer decades ahead of its time. It automatically adjusted the propeller pitch, throttle, fuel mixture, and supercharger settings based on altitude and engine load. In combat, where pilots had seconds to react, the 801 handled itself. Its square bore and stroke, 156 mm by 156 mm, allowed it to rev higher than typical radials, and its 2-speed supercharger gave it a fighting chance at altitude. Yet this came at a cost. The engine consumed over 400 liters of fuel per hour and needed 58 liters of oil just to stay alive. It was heavy, over 1,000 kilograms dry, and had to be cooled entirely by air. That meant every nut, bolt, and airflow calculation had to be perfect. There was no room for error, and soon the errors would begin piling up. Trial by fire, prototypes that refused to behave. When the first BMW 801 prototypes were mounted for testing, what came next was chaos. Engines overheated, pistons seized mid-flight, entire test beds erupted into flames. The dream of German engineering dominance nearly went up in literal smoke. Cylinder head temperatures soared past 300 degrees Celsius, far beyond safe limits. The air cooling system, so critical to the design, simply couldn't keep up with the internal inferno. Engineers scrambled for answers. Traditional airflow theory failed at this scale. The 801 wasn't just pushing boundaries, it was breaking them. Inside BMW's Munich facility, exhausted teams worked around the clock, reinventing air cooling from the ground up. They reshaped cooling fins, redesigned engine cowlings, and even developed new alloys to survive the temperatures. The Commando Gerate alone consumed over 40,000 man-hours of development. It was brilliant, but delicate. Every miscalibration meant catastrophic engine failure. Test pilots began refusing flights. The nickname Bavarian Furnace spread among crews. One test pilot barely landed the burning prototype. Another was nearly killed by a sudden bearing explosion at altitude. Dr. Hermann Oestrich, the engine's lead engineer, admitted in his memoirs, "Every morning I feared Berlin would cancel us. Every night I feared the engine would kill another man." BMW wasn't just building an engine, they were gambling with their future and their lives. Salvation in the Skies, FW-190's deadly debut. Then, in the fall of 1941, everything changed. Oberleutnant Otto Kittel throttled forward in a prototype Focke-Wulf FW-190. The BMW 801 roared to life, not sputtering, not flaming out, but growling with a deadly certainty. The fighter leapt into the sky and stunned everyone watching. It climbed faster than a Spitfire, rolled tighter than a hurricane, and dove like a meteor. The impossible engine had come alive. RAF pilots over France were the first to face it. They thought they were intercepting Bf-109s until the new German fighter rolled and shot past them with terrifying agility. Reports flooded in. "Out-turned me. Out-climbed me. I never saw him coming." The FW-190 wasn't just a new threat, it was a generational leap. Thanks to the 801's Commando Gerate, Luftwaffe pilots had a massive edge. While British pilots juggled throttles, mixtures, and pitch controls in combat, Germans focused entirely on the fight. The engine practically flew itself. Aces like Josef Pips Priller and Adolf Galland turned the FW-190 into a scalpel of destruction. By Christmas 1941, the RAF had lost 259 fighters to the 1940s, while downing only 78 in return. The tide had turned, and at its core was the engine that nearly never flew. The silent sabotage. Resistance from within. But beneath the roar of triumph, a quiet rebellion was forming, deep inside the very factories building the BMW 801. Forced laborers, resistance fighters, and even disillusioned German engineers began a campaign of invisible sabotage that would quietly rewrite the war. It began with minor defects, a bolt torqued just a little off, a cylinder head drilled microscopically thin, oil contaminated with metal shavings. These flaws didn't show up in quality checks, but they killed engines after 20 or 30 flight hours. The failures looked like wear and tear, but they were timed like clockwork. Engines would die in combat, not in tests. The sabotage became increasingly sophisticated. The Commando Gerate's cam profiles were subtly altered to run the engine lean at altitude, hot enough to damage, not hot enough to detect. A French engineer known only as Marianne led a network that included Polish, Belgian, and Czech workers. They scratched tiny symbols into engine casings to mark compromised units. BMW tried to clamp down. The Gestapo launched internal investigations. Suspected workers were tortured or executed. But the sabotage continued. Resistance fighters had turned wrenches into weapons. The Luftwaffe's deadliest tool was being slowly hollowed out by the very hands building it. The engine that should have failed, but didn't. January 1st, 1945, Operation Bodenplatte. Germany's last desperate gamble to regain air superiority. Over 1,000 aircraft took to the skies in radio silence. Among them, 439 FW190S, nearly all powered by BMW 801S. Many of those engines were over their service limits, held together by luck, desperation, and sabotage warped parts. And yet, they roared. In the freezing dawn, the 801s screamed across Allied lines. Pilots pushed them past redline, gauges buried in the danger zone, oil systems hemorrhaging, cylinders glowing red. But the engines held, just long enough. Captain Wilhelm Jonen destroyed 2 B-17s on the ground before his engine seized mid-climb. He crash-landed behind German lines, his cowling blackened and smoking. Major Heinz Baer led his unit for 8 hours that day on an engine rated for 5. When we landed, he recalled, oil poured from every seal. But the beast got us home. Despite the sabotage, the shortages, and the flawed designs, the BMW 801 delivered one final act of defiance. It couldn't save Germany. It couldn't change the war. But it proved that even a broken engine, battered, betrayed, and burning could still rise, if only for a moment, to shake the skies. Legacy of a Monster, Aftermath and Reflection. By war's end, over 61,000 BMW 801 engines had been produced, but the cost was staggering. Each engine demanded 1,247 separate manufacturing steps, consumed 3 tons of raw materials, and was assembled by a workforce of more than 140,000 people, many of them forced laborers from occupied countries. The 801 became more than a machine. It became a symbol of both German industrial brilliance and moral compromise. The engine powered not just the FW190, but also variants of the Ju 88 and the Dornier Du 217. In France, post-war engineers dissected captured 801s using the design to influence the Snecma 14R radial. Soviet aircraft designers incorporated elements of its pressure cooling system into their own post-war bombers. The Commando Gerate would go on to inspire early analog engine control units in jet aircraft, a concept now foundational to modern aviation. But for those who built them, the legacy was more personal and painful. Survivors of the forced labor program described brutal conditions, starvation rations, and daily threats of violence. Yet even under this pressure, resistance fighters sabotaged with precision, risking death to undermine the machine they were forced to assemble. In 1972, former BMW engineer Dr. Georg Meyer stood before a restored 801 at the Deutsches Museum. With tears in his eyes, he whispered, "We built a marvel and a monster." That duality haunts the engine's legacy to this day. Today, only 11 complete BMW 801s survive, displayed in museums, cut open to reveal the genius and the ghosts inside. They don't just represent engineering, they represent a moral crossroad. A masterpiece built under tyranny, a warhorse powered by pain, a reminder that even the greatest machines carry the fingerprints of everyone who touched them, engineers, pilots, and rebels. Final verdict, marvel or machine of madness? The BMW 801 was, by every technical measure, a masterpiece. It broke from German tradition, rewrote the rulebook on radial engine design, and introduced innovations that shaped the future of aviation. It automated complexity, it endured sabotage, and it transformed the Focke-Wulf 190 into one of the most feared aircraft of World War II. Yet for all its brilliance, the 801 was built on a foundation of suffering and denial. Its power came at a cost Germany tried to hide. Forced labor, underfed and overworked, were treated not as people but as tools, just like the machines they were building. The Commando Gerate, that elegant mechanical brain, may have saved pilots in the sky, but it was conceived in workshops echoing with screams. Every gear turned by hands that may have belonged to a starving teenager from Poland, a kidnapped machinist from France, or a defiant saboteur risking everything. What makes the BMW 801's story so chilling is not just its capability, but its context. It wasn't a weapon of necessity. It was a symbol of what a regime will sacrifice for dominance. The very same ingenuity that gave it life was used to ignore the suffering that made it possible. And yet, it also became a battlefield for resistance. The people who twisted bolts just slightly wrong, who etched symbols into cases, who turned fuel into poison, they remind us that no machine, no matter how mighty, is beyond human influence. Resistance doesn't always come with guns. Sometimes it comes with a wrench and the will to say no in the face of death. The BMW 801 was both a miracle and a madness. It flew, it killed, it failed, it was inspiring. It reminds us that history isn't written in horsepower, but in the choices of those who dared to build and those who dared to betray. The BMW 801 wasn't just an engine, it was a war within a war. A brilliant machine forged in darkness, sabotaged by light. It flew higher than it should have, lasted longer than expected, and carried with it the dreams of some and the defiance of others. Today, when one of those rare engines roars to life at an air show, it doesn't just echo through the skies, it echoes through history. If this story moved you, drop a like, hit subscribe, and tell us, should we uncover the secrets of the Jumo 213 or the Pratt & Whitney R2800 next? Let us know below.